Hello, and welcome back to Rehydrate. This season, we will be reading and discussing Liu Cixin's Death's End, the third and final part of the Remembrance of Earth's Past series. This is Season 5, Episode 3, Australia, covering the second half of Part 2. We've previously talked about the three-body problem and the Dark Forest, and have varying levels of knowledge on the book and the series. My name is Dan, and I've read the entire series.
This is Tim, and I've only read up to this week's reading.
This is Amin, and I've also only read up to this week's reading. And also, along with Dan and Talia, I co host the Rehydrate spoiler cast. So if you've read the entire series and/or don't care about spoilers, you should check that out too.
I had only one item of follow-up. It's not even really follow-up. I just happened to see it on Reddit recently, and there is apparently a three-body problem manga that has been released, and I was checking it out a little bit, and it looks pretty interesting. Yeah, so if you have read the three-body problem, and apparently I would assume that you have if you're just part of the podcast. But yeah, if you're interested in looking at that and kind of getting just a different visual take on the three-body problem, it's worth looking at.
Yeah, I guess that'd be the first piece of media to put forth some sort of visualization of the story.
Yeah, I've seen like other like concept art before or like,
Sure.
one-offs, and there's been like trailers of movies that never got made. But yeah, there's also a Minecraft version of Three Body Problem, which I think they got all the way up to some parts of Death's End. I don't know. I wasn't super into it, but they put a lot of work into it apparently. But yeah,
Is it
the
is it just a Minecraft like world just themed with the three-body problem, or is it like some like machinima thing?
I think it's like a machinima thing. Like
Oh
they
wow.
made like the world, like the story out of Minecraft, and like they post the characters around or whatever.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah.
Is the manga like has it covered the whole series yet, or is it just like
As far
book
as I could
one?
tell, it's only a three body problem. It's not even all of three body problem so
Oh,
far.
okay,
Like they're
so it's
releasing
still
it
going.
like yeah, they're releasing like some small sections like every week or something. And this Reddit post, they had like a list. They had a link to the entire first or everything that's released of the first book so far. So yeah, it's worth it. I kind of scrolled past it. It looks pretty interesting. Gives you a chance to kind of see what people think what the characters look like. All right, let's jump into the summary for this episode. Changxin's time as Swordholder comes to an abrupt end as six Trisolaran probes speed their way towards Earth. She only has 10 minutes to consider whether or not to activate the deterrent system. She realizes that she is not able to erase 3.5 billion years of history of the Earth and throws away the button. Shortly after, the probes reach Earth and destroy all the gravitational wave antennas on the Earth, disabling the Dark Force deterrents, but leave Changxin unharmed. When Changxin and AA go to examine the impact site, she is also met by Sofan, who tells her that Trisolaris predicted this outcome for years. Gravity has also been destroyed, and finally says, "Get ready to go to Australia, you pitiful bugs." Over the course of the next year, the entirety of humanity is forced to relocate to Australia as part of what's called the Great Resettlement. Conditions quickly devolve into a fight for food and resources, even with humanity even turning to theocracy and dictatorship. An Earth security force is established to force people who are not willing to relocate, eventually turning into the indiscriminate killing of people. The Earth resistance movement is also formed to fight the Trisolarans, despite the fact that all their moves can be tracked by the Sophons. Sophon announces the ultimate plan to defang and force humanity to fight over resources to the point where they're forced to eat each other to get the human population down to about 50 million people. Upon hearing this, Changxin finds herself going blind. Meanwhile, on board Gravity, James Hunter, who has been entrusted with destroying the gravitational wave antenna should anything happen, but once the dropout attack starts to happen, he finds the system to destroy the antenna is not functioning. Soon after, the droplets change course and seem to die, and finally they're boarded by the crew of the Blue Space. The crew of the Blue Space lays out what they believe what happened. The Trisolarans had attacked Earth and coordinated the dropout attack to coincide with the Swordholder handover ceremony. After a long discussion, they vote as a combined crew to activate the Universal Broadcast System and send the gravitational waves into the dark forest of space. Blueface then reveals the secrets of how they dismantle the droplets and what the strange phenomena they've been seeing aboard the Gravity are. In this region of space, they have been encountering fourth dimensional fragments, which they have been able to enter and experience interacting the world in higher dimensions. During further exploration of 4D space, they encounter beings that reside there. They're able to find a way to communicate with a ring shaped object and it cryptically tells them that it is a tomb and that they are fish in the puddle of a dying sea. After exiting the 4D space, they observe the fragments shrinking and finally, the ring itself losing its fourth dimension. Back on Earth, a year after the Great Resettlement has been completed, the news that the Universal Broadcast System was received by Trisolaris was met with cheering from humanity and retreat from the Trisolarians. Humanity would be returning home from Australia.
Maybe I missed this in the summary, but wasn't a so that the last part you read about the summary, was that when the Trisolaran sun was destroyed and basically Trisolaris was destroyed, or did I misread something?
No, the basically in this part of the chapter, the only thing that happened was that Trisolaris got the broadcast, and so the probes kind of leave Earth. So Trisolaris itself isn't destroyed. It's just the dark force has been activated basically from gravity, and everyone's like, "Oh, probably it's going to be I think everyone believes in the dark force theory so much that the Trisolarians then veer off course. All their new fleet that is able to achieve light speed now veers off course. The droplets leave Earth, and Sophon basically says, "All right, well, we'll help you resettle back to your original location." But the Trisolarians, like they believe that both Trisolaris and Earth are going to be destroyed because of the broadcast, because the close proximity of the planets.
Oh, for some, I must have misread something because I thought that a Trisolaran, maybe I'm thinking of something I'm not supposed to think of right now, so you can cut this whole part out. Never mind.
Okay.
But yeah, that's how I took it. That they just realized, oh, they all believe we're all now, and humanity is in such a dire straits that they're like cheering this on. They're like, well, maybe we only got a couple centuries left, but at least we don't have to like live like this anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the conditions in Australia were pretty dire there,
Yeah,
and it seemed to be the Trisolarans pushing them towards even a more dire immediate future with having to like, eat people and stuff.
yeah, I wouldn't give a shit at that, but I just be just happy to see a big you to the Trisolarans.
Yeah.
Although it still sort of begs the question that if they all, I mean, I guess the Trisolarans, they revert course because they're just attempting to do some sort of escape now. Like, if they believe like, oh, well, both worlds are still going to be destroyed, like, I guess they feel that they have a fighting chance by not. I guess I'm wondering why they still didn't like attempt to carry out their plan with Earth and at least maybe take it over and extract its resources or, give themselves, some sort of fighting chance, but maybe.
Well, I mean, it takes a lot of resources to just stop, right? Like they talked a
Right.
lot about like
Yeah.
it takes a lot of time to accelerate and a lot of time to decelerate,
Right.
and they probably feel like they have better chance of just because like they are assuming that Trisolaris is going to be destroyed and Earth is going to be destroyed because of the close proximity of the systems, right? So if they can
Right.
see Trisolaris, they can see, oh, there's another one over here, and they're communicating with each other. Yeah, I think they probably feel one because they've achieved light speed now, they can probably get to other habitable planets and
That's true.
figure it
Yeah.
out. And then two, like I don't know, I don't guess my second point, but the first thing is that yeah, they figured they could just find a different place that would suit their needs better because the both worlds are uninhabitable now because they're imminently going to be destroyed as much as they think. So the first thing I want to talk about, I mean, there's a lot that happens in the section here. So I kind of wanted to digest it, as a group, kind of piece by piece here. So let's start first with a Trisolarian attack. We laughed out last time with kind of a cliffhanger of like, oh, they're going to attack or they're not going to attack, and they do immediately. The part I found was interesting was that it's again human overconfidence that causes them to lose confidence. They talked a lot about, oh, there used to be 23 gravitational wave antennas, and because of some terrorist attack that happened, and we don't need to have all this deterrence in place. We just have 4 antennas, and that should be enough. Or sorry, not 4. They had 5 total, and so like they dismantle them, but that becomes the reason that they fail. And also like they don't put them in space because they're also worried about the events that happen with blue space and Bronze Age by making them. They're really worried about those gravitational wave antennas falling into the wrong hands. So anyway, I found that really really interesting to me.
Well, I guess the reason why like that was a huge mistake was their, to keep them all on Earth was their close proximity to each other. Now they could, like, if I read that correctly, it's because the droplets could destroy them all within a matter of, within a short amount of time.
Right.
Whereas if they had been scattered among, in space, then no matter what they could have scattered them to the point where no matter what, like one of them would get off a signal.
Even if they had like still 19 of them on Earth, right? Like it still took a little bit for the droplets to just destroy one of the gravitational wave antennas. Like not that long, but still enough time for one of the other ones to send the the broadcast. But yeah, they should have done it in space.
Did either of you take this as a commentary on nuclear disarmament? And I know the so-called Cold War between the USSR and US is no longer going on, but I remember when I was younger reading something about how US and the Soviet Union each had like 2,000 nuclear missiles, and it was enough to destroy the world 20 times over. I'm making up numbers here.
Yeah.
But then the whole idea was if they just had 10 each, that would be enough to deter each other from war. And as I was reading this about the, I just saw it as a parallel to that, about how disarmament could be, to the bare necessity, I guess, to that point, is actually a weakness. So it's good to have more. I don't know. I don't know if you guys looked at it like that at all, but that was what came to mind as I was reading this.
Well, it's definitely an extrapolation of, mutually assured destruction, theory. In fact, I think they even, I mean, at some point in the book, I think they even makes a reference to that, right? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
And I forget where, but yeah, the notion of like, I guess I didn't draw some, like parallel to, I mean, because the U.S. is stockpiled. Like I don't know, like, to what degree it's cut back its nuclear armament, but it hasn't done so like that much as far as my understanding is. But I could be completely wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more that if they had gone down to like basically like if they had basically put all say like the weapons in one location, which is basically what we're doing. Like we're putting them all on Earth, right? Because the droplets can attack. But like say we put all the missiles in Washington D.C. or something, and then like the Russians just happen to just bomb there, and then like it loses all effectiveness.
Yeah,
But
Sure.
yeah, I think there's definitely. I mean, I'm almost positive that there's parallels there that he's drawing to the Cold War and to the now deterrence, and just at a more cosmic scale across galaxies, I guess.
But yeah, I think what Amelia is saying is that it's kind of like why, any smaller nation wants to get their hands on at least one nuclear weapon or so, because the capability to hit one city or so is enough of a deterrent that you don't need a whole lot to throw your weight around, or to think that you are an effective that you can mount an effective deterrence, and that this is where humanity got overconfident and that it felt like it could reduce its arsenal, or like not go overboard.
I mean, they spend a lot of time talking. Like there's constant references to like, oh, we don't really need this deterrence anymore. We're good with
Right.
Trisolarans. Like that's the reason they voted Changxin as the as the sorcerer there, because they're like, we don't really need someone who's actually going to activate deterrence, because like it'll probably just go away eventually because we're cool now.
Right, yeah, and it's definitely, it seems to be a recurring theme throughout these books, is that humanity like is always kind of like taking the most optimistic approach to everything, and
Yeah.
yeah, falling into complacency, and yeah, maybe it's like some basic flaw in humanity, that it's like we're soft-hearted enough that we think the best outcome is going to happen, and that we do not prepare for the worst case scenario. Luigi was the one guy.
Him and Wade, where we're ready to and even like humanity themselves, like become more feminized and more soft-hearted or
Sure.
so. And like I think that's sort of that's supposed to represent like humanity's sort of lax attitude around the dark forest. Like even though the dark forest is such like a harsh concept, like humanity just like chooses to ignore it. And everyone freaked out when the dark forest was revealed, right? When Lao Ji like 50 or 60 years ago revealed it, and then they more and more just complacent to the point where people got more feminized and then deactivated basically like deactivated their advantage over the Trisolarans.
So I feel like I was kind of right in the last episode where the absorption and creation of like human like culture by the Trisolarans of human culture and creating movies and television shows were
Yeah,
was kind of this big fake out in a way to convince
definitely. It
convince
was.
humans to that they had softened too, and that there was this shared maybe shared of understanding which led humans to put their guard down a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the part where they talk about how the Trisolarans, like, they planned this whole thing to the point where, like, they launched their lightspeed ships, like, with the hope that they wouldn't detect it before they actually activated the sword holder changeover, you know? So they kind of engineered the whole thing. So if they had seen, like, the lightspeed ships is like it was like 30 days later or something, they would have known something was happening. Yeah, and so, like, yeah, definitely, like, this whole thing is like a long con by the Trisolarans. So as soon as they started absorbing the deceit of the humans, like they're able to kind of engineer like this whole scenario where they, whereby Changxin, and it's not really her fault, I think. It's
Right.
like just humanity's fault of
Yeah,
just being
she's
kind of lackadaisical.
Wait, what's not? But it's her fault she didn't trigger it, though, right?
I mean, like that's a very hotly contested issue. Among this is probably she is probably the most controversial of characters in the whole series. So the I kind of picked out a couple of quotes specifically around this, and like over and over again, they keep telling her, it's not your fault. I mean, she didn't press the button. That's true, but she was set up in a way that she was never going to press that button. They said like she had a 10% chance of actually activating deterrence, um, but humanity wanted someone like that, and in control of that button, right? So there's a couple quotes, like one from Sofan here saying, "You acted just as we anticipated. Don't be too hard on yourself. The fact that humankind chose you and they chose this result, out of all the members of the human race, you're the only innocent." And then later on, the elder in Australia says, "Child, you failed to hold the enemy's gaze, but it's really not your fault. Not your fault." I fall on the side that it's not her fault that she didn't activate deterrence. It's humanity's fault for choosing her, I guess. That's kind of my take on it. But like I said, it's a really hotly contested issue. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
yeah, I mean it's sort of an impossible ask to lay on anyone's shoulders, I would think, given that you can't really predict the future. Are you're really just going to blow everything up? I guess I would say for myself, I would make this, even knowing all of this, I would probably still make the same decision she did.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Same.
like, yeah, it's like I'm a human. There's no, like I'm like just I'm a representative. She's a representative of humanity for all its strengths and faults. So
So in that context, is Luo Ji a bad guy then? Because we assume he would have pushed a button.
That's a good question. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like we actually don't know if he would have pressed it. I mean, they said like 90% he would have pressed it, right? I I don't know. I don't know if he would have. Maybe he guy probably would have.
I mean, is he a human being, so changed by his experiences? It seems like that. Yeah, maybe he was just not your typical human. Maybe this is the one job he could do, because if he were, given power in any other, circumstance or something, like would he be a despot or a sociopath or something at this point? I don't know, but
Yeah.
like, he was seemed like his experiences had uniquely shaped him into a type of person that wasn't really representative of humanity as a whole, and maybe that made him the right person to hold the button. But yeah,
Right.
like I
Yeah.
get what the book is trying to say with regards to Cheng Xin, is that humanity has reached this point where she is, the genuine representative of their attitudes and feelings at this point, so it's not really her fault.
I fall on the side of she had a job and she didn't do her job. Whether or not she was capable of doing the job, that's a different matter. But yeah, that was the one thing she was supposed to do, and she made the conscious decision to not do what she was supposed to do. So I guess I don't feel differently about the character.
Hmm.
Maybe because I already knew this was going to happen, but I don't feel differently about the character. But I also don't think it's not her fault.
I mean, I guess like Villagy definitely bought into the dark forest principle, right? And maybe Chongqing doesn't in the same way. She has a more optimistic view of like, well, even if the Trisolarians come here and take over the planet, like obviously bad stuff happened, and I don't think she could have foreseen the Great Resettlement, but that's still probably preferable to the entire Earth being destroyed, right? So maybe like that was her thinking of, or maybe I guess let me take that back. Maybe she did believe in the dark forest theory and didn't want to see the certain destruction of Earth, right? And the alternative is that at least humanity is still around and can take their chances, and maybe it has a more optimistic view of like what those chances would be, given that Earth is still a place where if she had activated it, then maybe the Earth would have just been destroyed, and then all life would have been gone for sure. That doesn't make her
Yeah,
a great sword holder, but
right. Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess it's how much you actually believe in the dark forest, deterrence, concept, and even though we had this one example of Luigi doing the whole spell thing and seeing this planet get destroyed. I mean, I guess if you're gonna like why not take your chances with seeing what happens if you don't do it, if you actually it's like if you actually believe that like everything's going to be destroyed, then you're at this point you're just pressing the buttons simply to spite the Trisolarans. Isn't it at least more interesting? Or is there a chance for something good, some life to continue if you don't press it? I guess that's that. I mean, those are the doubts that would enter my mind and that would keep me from pressing the button.
for sure. Yeah, and I always thought like, well, maybe I come down on the side of Changxin. It's not her fault. It's because like that's what I would do. I wouldn't want to be blamed either, right? So I guess maybe I more identify with her character, and like that's how I think I would act, and maybe
Yeah.
that's why I don't. There's always like this debate online of like Wade versus Changxin, and it's dumb. Yeah, I always fall on the side of Changxin because I feel like that's how I would act. I do want to talk more about the chapter of the Great Resettlement because
A lot happens in that chapter.
yeah, it's like it's a very densely packed sociological piece, right? It talks about like how quickly humanity would kind of fall and just like kind of crumble into all these different ways. And I thought it was I don't know, I find it really fascinating that whole part, and that's why I named the episode Australia, because I think that's it's a super interesting people. It sticks in your mind. I think after you read the series of like how would humanity react to being this very exaggerated overpopulated state where you're fighting for resources. Like how would humanity like how would the social structures change? Like I really like I say like, but I think what I mean is interesting how like the native Australians, like will keep the major cities to themselves and all the weapons to themselves, and like for only native Australians, and then people, and then they have the Earth Security Force,
Right.
the basically like it reminded me of the collaborators and like in France of with the Nazis, right, where like they're like going helping the Nazis like help the Germans to root out the people that they wanted to kill. Even so much as like the guy in like the flying car like shooting people indiscriminately reminded me of
Right.
the guy from Full Metal Jacket, just like
Right.
shooting Vietnamese.
It's not going to attract the best of humanity.
No.
This if and you're probably already thrust into an environment where human value of human life is going down precipitously. So and then you put the worst people in charge, they're not going to show any restraint either. It's probably their last gasp of like power.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Humanity, if anything, like, yeah, any small bit of power they have, they'll cling to it and like, overuse it, especially in dire circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, this whole reading set, this whole section, for this week and all that is like, I won't say like jump the shark for it because that's not that doesn't that's not accurate to what I mean here. But like this whole series has been like I feel like Lucius Shin, like he took a bunch of sociology classes in college and a bunch of astrophysics classes in college, and this whole series is like him trying to take the kitchen sink approach and like apply like every like cool astrophysics thing he learned and every concept he learned about human sociology or political science or whatever and all that, and like like tries to put some vignette or some chapter or some element of that into these books, and I think it kind of like reached ahead here with this, both with like the Australia thing and the well, I mean we haven't gotten to the fourth dimensional stuff yet, but
Hmm.
I really like admire the breadth and of ideas that he tries to put in this, but it also like results in such a lurching narrative at points where it's like this whole suddenly just like all of like humanity's like collapse is like covered in like a chapter here,
Yeah.
you know and you could write a whole you could base a whole series of novels, or the setting of Australia itself here, or
Right.
and he does it all in a chapter, and it's just kind of a testament to such how odd the narrative is throughout all of this, where he like will sit for especially like the first half of the previous book and all that, you'll have chapters upon chapters of this character's headspace, and then like the collapse of humanity all happens in just this one chapter. um, so
Yeah, I agree with you, Tim, and especially the Australia chapter. I stopped caring because I was pretty sure none of it was going to matter. But I agree. I think this chapter and then the other chapter that I'm sure we'll talk about around the fourth dimension stuff was a lot of here's a bunch of ideas that I read when I was in college, and I'm gonna try to stick it in this narrative as well. I like that description of it, but yeah, the Australia chapter I especially did not care about at all. I couldn't even tell you what happened in it because I think I probably just skimmed it. That's how
I mean,
briefly I skimmed it.
it was interesting as far as the narrative as a whole. It's just that it in the moment it kind of just gets like frustrating to read sometimes. Usually my anchor to a book, or a novel or a series of novels are like the characters and the through lines there. And I mean, as we've gone through this series, it's obvious that like characters aren't necessarily the focus. They're just the exception of like a tiny handful, that they're kind of there just to provide like an observer for whatever cool sci-fi thing is going to happen in this chapter. Yeah, I mean it just it gets I guess I don't know how to feel about it really, because it's just so like I suppose when we're done with this book, and like we're pretty far along, that I like the story as a whole. It
Hmm.
just gets really frustrating to read in like at times, and like this chapter and like the fourth dimension stuff were like that for me.
And my frustration with this, and for the same reason, I was less frustrated by the four dimensional stuff. And I don't know this for a fact because I don't actually remember talking about this, but I don't think this Australia stuff really matters long term. Like, I don't think it affects I don't think it becomes a major plot point in anything going forward. So it was just, here's 100 pages about how bad humans are, and then then we'll move on to the next part.
Well, it means something if you were like invested in the fate of humanity, and like as part of like how is this all going to shake out, and
Yeah, but
like
he
the worst, like and like almost the worst possible thing happens to them, and it's just
but he set everything up and then he undid everything within
right,
in
yeah.
less than half of a part. So yeah, I guess that's why I didn't care, because as soon as I got to the end and they're like, oh yeah, everyone's going back home, I was like, oh well, that
Right,
was
there
I
is this.
want that half hour of my life back.
Well,
Well,
I'll say that they're leaving Australia, but they're going back home because the Dark Forest broadcast has been initiated, right? So it has like consequentially changed humanity, and there's probably gonna be repercussions for the stuff that happens in Australia, and like humanity is gonna kind of evolve differently based off of those events, right? So same way like the droplet attack where they changed a lot of people, like they referenced that a couple times, about how the droplet attacks like changed the military and like people's thinking. I think Australia is going to also change people's mindset going forward as well, just based off of such a traumatic. They also talk a lot about like the Great Ravine, right? And we don't really see that, but like that has also kind of changed humanity's thinking pretty greatly. Same way like in real life, like we would our thinking is changed by stuff by World War II or the Great Depression, like that kind of thing.
I think just narratively, it's it's just it's sort of a repeat of what happens in this in the previous book. this devastating thing happens, and then like for these sort of weird counterintuitive reasons, like humanity like has like a bounce back, or this little like rocky moment, with the ships were destroyed by the droplets, and humanity was at its darkest, hour, and then Luigi's, whole spell thing and deterrence that, kind of like brings them back. And then like this is kind of like that dilemma and that comeback dialed up to 11. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like the stakes being raised, and it's starting to establish like a pattern almost. That's almost like, Game of Thrones, where you just kind of expect the worst thing to happen now. Like, I don't, so, I mean, again, I don't know what happens in we have, half or a little over half of the book to go,
Yeah.
but this being a little bit of a repeat, of a previous book, seems to be like establishing a bit of a pattern to me. And like, is this like Liu Shishin's trick here is to like just dial up the tragedy that happens each time, and then have a twist at the end. Humanity comes back in some way, or punches back in some way.
I mean, yeah, there have been a lot of times of humanity becoming overconfident and
Right.
failing, right? And this is the second occurrence of that, right?
Or
You
like
had
the
a,
cycle, it's
yeah.
like given that kind of, it feels like there's cycles happening here. I guess that means like I'm expecting it to happen again, or like how at this point, just to make a quick prediction about the end of the series, and I could be obviously wrong. Like a lot of this has gone in ways that I certainly didn't expect. But yeah, that's kind of like how I think the last half of it is going to go. Is that like again, like the absolute worst thing is going like to happen, and there's one human left on Earth, and that one human, I don't know, blows up the aliens that are blowing up all the other planets. I don't know.
So what would be the absolute worst thing that could happen would be maybe what?
I don't know. There's, like I said, there's one human left.
Uh-huh.
It's just his character, and then that human somehow destroys the aliens that are destroying all the other planets. I know I'm being silly, but it's just like that's how it feels. How like
No,
that feels like the pattern, the ramp up pattern that's being established here.
sure, sure. I mean, like, yeah, totally. But let's also jump into the other big part of this chapter which was the stuff that happens aboard gravity and blue space, and we kind of alluded to a little bit. And I'm going to start with something that I'm sure Tim appreciated, which is a big the fourth dimensional space gore section where they go and the guy is like the old hunter is trying to activate the turrets, and like he sees the guy in the chamber, and he like and all of a sudden his heart's out of his body and beating and spewing blood everywhere. And I was like, oh man, Tim's gonna be into this.
This was neat, but I couldn't. This is where couldn't quite tell what was going on by the
uh,
like what exactly happened to him.
I guess it's not explained in the moment, but like it's kind of
Right,
explained later on where they talk about they're using these four-dimensional fragments to be able to interact with every part of every solid object, right? And they even
right,
say like, be careful where you put your hands because the because like you can hit an internal organ if you're not careful. And so that's what they did, and this also ties back into the very beginning part of the book, the Constantinople chapter, where the girl is ripping out the brain of the guy, is because a four-dimensional fragment interacted with the Earth, and she was able to use it for a little while until it disappeared. Right, so that's how that all ties back in.
oh
But it's
god, I didn't make that connection in them.
oh yeah,
in the in the moment. So maybe that was, well, maybe it's just a consequence of like doing these things. We probably did that episode 2 months ago now,
right.
but yeah, like it was, neat. But like previous instance of space gore, where it's like everybody was like pressed into the side of this, and turned into
Oh
goo.
yeah,
Like I understood that from like a matter of physics, and
yeah,
like here, like it was such a kind of like whirlwind of me trying to wrap my head around what he's trying to describe, especially this with the 4D stuff,
right.
that it was really hard to follow. So it's like, okay, his heart is outside of his body now. Did it get teleported, like just somehow teleported outside of his body by a fourth dimensional bubble, or what? And was it an accident, like, or it was intentional by, so like the blue space guy, 4D cosmonauts or whatever, yanked his heart out,
No, he definitely did it on purpose because you remember the old hunter like shot him like twice, right?
Right.
And then so like his last resort was to use that 4-dimensional fragment to go and grab his heart, and then you can see and they talk about like his face goes white all of a sudden, and like this is all like consciousness, and they said, all right, if we could put it back in because we cleanly took it out, if you guys surrender. And it didn't really ever mention if he does do that. I'm assuming they do. It's just like a cool way to kind of resolve that conflict without having a gun or whatever.
Right.
So it's also a parallel to like what they did to the droplets. So like the way that you can disable a droplet, because we have no idea how they work, is that they just use the 4-dimensional fragment to jump into one of the fragment or to one of the droplets and just muck around with it. And that, I think they even said as much. They just like pulled a bunch of stuff out, like it eventually died and tarnished.
Right. And I think it's just, this part felt like descriptively like he was quite a bit off a little more than he could chew here, because it was, so like difficult, obviously, to try to describe, or at least what he imagines 4D space is like, that it was like
Definitely.
difficult for me to follow, and therefore difficult for me to like piece together what was actually just going on here.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, for sure. Like this part is super confusing, and I will readily admit I did not get it on my first read either. It's only been on subsequent readings where like when you kind of get how things are building up here, and like I wouldn't have put it together that the same thing happened in Constantinople is happening here. But that's
sure.
what it is. Is like these 4D fragments are kind of like going through, and and they even mentioned like I wonder if a 4-dimensional fragment ever interact with the Earth, and so like that's the tie together. I thought like on maybe on subsequent rereads, like I think he does as good of a job as you can to describe what 4D would be like, because like it's so out of our perception, right? Like we just as people, like we don't have the fourth dimension to think about. So I thought he did a good job of like, explaining, like especially like when they enter it and like they use the ship and they're going really slow and like they can see like all the things, like they talk about like unfurling like a roll or something, right? Um
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have no concept of what it would be like. So I have no idea whether he did a good job or not. Like, I have no
right,
frame of
yeah.
reference.
My weird Google of the week was so I thought this was interesting too, kind of the way he described it. I'd read descriptions of the fourth dimension similar to this before, so I thought in the context of narrative, I thought he did a good job of trying to explain it. But one of the things was they said something about they didn't want to accidentally touch the wrong thing when they were in the space, so they decided to use voice activated commands a lot to do whatever they needed to do there. So I googled how does sound move the fourth dimension, and Google didn't have any good answers for me, or I didn't bother looking long enough. But I was just curious how sound waves would move in 4 dimensions, because I know I can imagine what they would move like in 2 dimensions, and then extrapolating that up to three, it's pretty different. So then I was wondering if someone had thought about what it would look like in 4 dimensions and whether or not voice commands would actually work or not. So anyway,
I thought time was the fourth dimension. Not,
No, I think
no,
that's
okay.
I think that was like a theory like a long time ago, but I think it's been kind of
Okay.
disproven. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
disproven. Air
yeah,
quotes.
I've never taken physics at that level, so yeah, it's all. I have no idea whether he's like describing this in some way or attempting to describe this that is like at least somewhat scientifically grounded or not. He could just be completely making it up, and I'd be fine with me either way.
Yeah, I mean, as far as my understanding, again, this is like limited to cursory Google searches and this book and some Carl Sagan videos, talking about like how the fourth dimensional works. Like, I mean, like it's yeah, I think like this one does a pretty good job of like seeing like how you can see the same way if you have a two-dimensional object as a third dimensional person, we can see inside that circle, right? Where if you're a two-dimensional object, you couldn't see inside that. Where if you're in the fourth dimensional space, you're able to like look inside all of the elements of a three-dimensional object, right? So like that's why they're able to like look inside a body, look inside a ship, or look inside whatever. Like they're able to like just see all the facets of that third dimension. They talk a lot about like if they look at the ship, they can see like all the pipes, they can see the water, and they talk about it like being an infinite, what I call like an infinite recursion of dimension or of detail, right? Like they can keep looking down and down and down and anything, and it kind of expands. But like if you think about it, like as a visual thing, we wouldn't be able to see elements, right? We can only see like visually like there, so like they can only unfold so much.
And then the other thing I was interested, so clearly you can move from the third dimension to the fourth dimension and not be harmed. But I was wondering if a fourth dimensional character came into the third dimension, what would happen to him or her?
Well, they talk about that at the end. So if you remember at the very end of this chapter, we have this section with the ring and the other objects in the four-dimensional space, right? Those are four-dimensional. Those are native four-dimensional beings. Yeah, they talk a lot about like the ring being a four-dimensional, natively four-dimensional, right? And then the space that they're in is like a dying sea or a drying sea that's kind of always contracting, right? And then it's contracting enough where the ring actually has to exit out of that four-dimensional space, and you can see it like projecting into 3D space by like getting really really big and turning into this color, and then it's kind of fading away. I don't know if it dies because of it, but they talk a lot about like the lines coming out of there, and like they talk about like the horizon, or not horizon, but like the space being cut into two because like the ring itself like projects so massively across the expanse because like the ring is so big.
Right, but that's for an inanimate object. I'm like, what about a living fourth dimensional being?
I mean, we don't know that the ring is not living, I
Oh,
guess.
okay. All right.
But I guess it's not good, either way. The same way, like if we were, say, like we enter a black hole and like we were pressed into two dimensions, right? They call it like spaghettification, right?
Yeah, that wouldn't be
Where
great.
Yeah, so it's also going from a higher dimension to a lower dimension is probably not good for anything, right? Especially living or anything else. So I'm guessing it's the same at higher dimensions. Because they talk a lot about like you can, so say you have like a cube like in real life, like you have a glass cube and you see the shadow of it, right? That's a 2D projection of a 3D object. So you lose a lot of the you lose a lot of it, right? So like it'll probably be the same for going from four dimensions to three dimensions, where you'd like lose a lot of the essence of your being, I guess. I don't know. Like it's hard to describe, I guess.
Yeah, it's all theoretical. Although, even like accepting the premises, that this version of 4D space that he presents here and all that seems hard to believe that like a human, like the human brain is a construct and an expression. It's a 3D object and it's this expression of 3D physics and all that like a human brain would even be able to comprehend. It was surprising to me that like they were even able to like comprehend anything enough to be productive in that space.
Totally, yeah. You'd think it'd be just like totally a sensory overload, right? When you go in there, you're like you have no idea. Everything just looks like
Right.
mishmash of
Yeah. I mean,
everything.
yeah. Why would something built in 3D, like be built in a way that it could even process this? I mean, and they say, he does say that, oh, there's just it's overwhelming and all that, but it seems like you just go insane and that's it, or it would just kind of obliterate your,
Yeah.
like you just wouldn't have the equipment to be able to do anything in that.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, they talk about like when they exit 3D space or 4D space and go into 3D space, they feel confined, right?
Yeah.
So like now it's like, oh, I can only see in three dimensions. So it's like maybe our brains are just able to adapt, or that's the hypothesis here is that our brains are able to adapt to these circumstances, and because we are 3D beings, like we're able to enter 4D space and not be harmed. Where so going to higher dimensions is okay, but going from a higher dimension to a lower dimensions, it's more ruinous for people and art objects and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, like to me, like this is the kind of stuff I'm super into. Like just dimensionality in general, I think is like always like super interesting. Like I've looked at after reading the series, I've gone back and like looked at like a bunch of material just to kind of get a sense of like what it's like. I'm totally into this chapter just for it. That said, I have no idea how they're going to film it. Like when I think I said last time, like I said like this is one of the reasons I think I brought up the segment of how they're going to film this. Like this is the real reason. I have no idea how they're going to film this because like I don't know. Like the only I've said it a couple of times, but the only like representation on film that I've seen of 4-dimensional space is the Tesseract from Interstellar, and that was mixed results, I guess, of like how that is, of how that was received.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into it as well. Like in the macro sense, I think this in this chapter, I think just the prose and description of it, got a little too tortured for their own good. Like I did have a hard time following it, but yeah, I mean, as again as how they would film this, I mean, they could do anything, and since I have no frame of reference, I mean, is it just like they're you're going to, I mean, I guess you could just fall back on, like, you could use weird CG bubbles or something like that to show people going in, and then they just describe what it's like, and like kind of like, I mean, maybe that's the best approach. Just kind of like leave it up to the viewer's imagination. Have some really good explanate, or some good exposition about some character about what it was like in there.
Would you like that though? I don't
I,
know. I don't
I
know if I
mean,
would like
I don't
that.
know.
I mean, you're a resident film expert. How do you think they should or will film this?
I don't know how that would actually work, because it seems like, again, it was difficult enough to describe using words. So visually, I don't know how they would be able to do it without it being. Yeah, I have no idea how you would do that effectively. I agree that I think that Interstellar did the best they could. But
Yeah, and I think I have like a greater appreciation for it after reading this book, and thinking like, well, they represented like all possible outcomes, or like I guess like they had like a little bit a different idea of like dimensionality, where it was more of like the multiverse kind of stuff, like where you think the multiverse dimensionality where like all possible outcomes can happen, where this one is more at a physical level where you can kind of see all facets of a 3D object in 4D, so it's a little bit different, I guess, that the
yeah,
idea they're trying to get to, but still visually it seems silly at the time, but like thinking back on it, it's like, well, that's a really, really hard thing to show. I think one of the most cryptic things of the whole series, and there's other cryptic stuff that's happening soon too, but the ring, I think, it's our interaction with the ring is probably the most cryptic. And I definitely didn't get it on the first read. Did you guys get anything out of the interaction with the ring or exploration into the 4D space?
I mean, I think he's just doing his version of, yeah, like ancient aliens or precursor aliens, or just, yeah, I'm not sure what to think. I kind of thought of Halo the whole time, just the but yeah, I mean, I could see this like being like the thing that's maybe like not, like, I don't know if this is going to be an element going forward or in the remainder of this book, and whether he's just going to leave this as this like weird thing just to kind of keep you guessing at how weird the universe might is, or if these become like a major plot point later on. But yeah, I don't know. I think he's just attempting to flex his astrophysics brain muscles here, and try to give us his interpretation of a very, very bizarre, sort of incomprehensible alien.
So I think like the important thing to take away from this chapter, the or section or what have you, around the ring specifically, is that these aliens, these 4-dimensional aliens, like didn't always live in this part of 4D space, but they're kind of forced here. And that 4D space is continually collapsing to the point where they can't even fit into the 4D space anymore, and they have to get reprojected into 3D space. I think that's the important thing to take away going forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he presents this idea of the universe as something that's like the universe is, a big 3D fabric that has these bubbles of 4D space, as if something is like like something is decaying here, or our universe is the result of like something decaying, or in its like last stages, or of like some degenerative state. So that's kind of how I took it.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's the part I didn't get when I initially read it. Is that the ring speaks very cryptically. It's like, I'm a tomb. And they said like, did you make this 4D space? And like, well, did you make the sea that you came from? It's just like where they live, the place that they're living is like rapidly collapsing.
Right. Yeah. So it's like it feels like he's like presenting the idea that our universe that we think of is so big and impressive and majestic and all that might just be like the stuff that's left over when something dies and rots away or something.
Yeah, because like if we were all four-dimensional beings, like we would see much, much differently, and maybe even higher dimensional, right? Like then they talk about the Sophons being 11-dimensional, right? So maybe there's five-dimensional beings out there that think four-dimension is too limiting, right? I guess like overall, like I know like you guys kind of touched on your sentiments of the chapter a little bit, but does this change your excitement for the rest of the book? Does it kind of? I mean, it seems like you guys weren't super into it.
Yeah, I'm interested. It's just just a bit of frustration with the writing style, and like I think again I was like kind of the most frustrated with the 4D space in that like I could very much like he gave very good it's me going back to Space Gore again or something like that, but you know because I could really follow what was going on, and like that just kind of like fell apart here a bit because he's again maybe just trying to bite off more than he could chew. Like I just had the most difficult time with this section in this chapter, kind of following along what was happening, and it's maybe again because what he's describing is very difficult to describe. But I think it was just like the detail, like certain details, like what was happening to James Hunter's heart and why was it suddenly outside of his body. The connection back to Constantinople. And I guess that again that just might be because we read that chapter a couple months ago and just didn't make that connection and all that. So it
Sure.
just might be a consequence of just reading this, like the reading sections being spread apart like that. But yeah, I just had the most difficult time kind of following narratively what was going on here. Probably definitely worth easier on reread, and it's probably I imagine like is the experience of a lot of readers that this part probably gets reread a lot, but
Yeah.
and discussed, and like it's yeah, I mean I could see this being really ripe for internet discussion. Yeah, I mean maybe it's just me just coming off a little bit of the shell shock of like just first reading it is a little more frustration I'm used to with the series.
Yeah, I would say that's my experience too. Like the four-dimensional chapters, I did not fully get the first time I read it, and it is enhanced by reading it multiple times. And there's other parts of this book too that are enhanced by reading multiple times. I mean, the whole book is worth reading multiple times, I think. But yeah, like kind of getting that full context and like understanding like why they're talking about this, like, and it'll become, I think it becomes evident to everybody like why they're talking about this later on.
Yeah, I like, well, not the Australia part, but the 4D part. I liked it conceptually, but again, I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care if James Hunter lived or died. Like that was basically irrelevant in the context of the thing. I think Lucy Shin just wanted to show, hey, look at this cool thing that the Sophons can do, and I'm going to take his heart out of his body. And it wasn't actually about the character at all. It was just about the spectacle, I guess. So I'm interested in more spectacle, and I am not so interested in any of the characters anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean this whole section takes like involves entirely new characters that you've known,
Yeah,
so it's just that little bit of disconnect. It's for brand new characters, like how could you care about them? They're just like they're here just to be the observers
the
of
the red the
what's
red
going on.
the red shirts, Tim.
Yeah, I mean for what's going on in 4D space, and this could be like this is a big highlight moment and like kind of a cool thing that's happening, but it's just that little bit of a disconnect that this isn't being like done by characters that have like built up, have reached this point that I followed along. So like it just robs, and also just it being a little hard to follow in the moment, it just sort of like robs it of a little bit of like the power that I think he might have been going for here to me.
Yeah, I wonder in the show if they're going to try to reconfigure it a little bit to keep more consistent characters. Like, yeah, it is a thing. Like, there's a lot of characters that come through and go away.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, I mean, kind of imagine if you're watching this episode of this TV and then this whole episode is devoted to this cool thing happening, but it's entirely brand new characters that were just introduced that episode. Like it's just like this bottle episode, like this 100% bottle episode with brand new characters who are just there for this episode.
well, I do like those kind of episodes, but
Yeah.
uh, so like Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I would like it. But I don't know if you guys ever watched Mythic Quest. There's like it's like a show on
No.
Apple TV, and they have like these couple like episodes, these bottle episodes that have like entirely different characters, but like are in that world still. And I think it's really those kind of shows are or those kind of episodes are really interesting.
Yeah, I could see that happening as a if that was the expectation and you knew that
Yeah,
every episode was like that. But again, it's like he has some characters that have and it's just like the narrative lurches and shifts so quickly into from the perspective of these longer term characters into these short term characters, that it's jarring.
one criticism that can be levied is that the plot doesn't move because like a lot of stuff happens in this small chapter. Like we go from like living in like this like utopia world, deterrence world to like a great resettlement in just like course of a couple of chapters. So I think that's one thing that can't be too critical of. Maybe it goes too fast. Maybe that is a criticism. One thing I did forgot to mention was I want to talk about was the character of Sophon. So she changes pretty dramatically, which I think turns into this ninja person, I guess,
Yeah,
and like
yeah,
starts cutting
super
people in half. That's a pretty interesting turn there. Like like the Trisolarans, like she's the ambassador for Trisolaris, right? So she like as soon as the ruse is kind of laid out there, she cuts her hair, has the katana on her back. So that was a pretty interesting character development there.
Yeah, it's a little video gamey, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
it kind of represents the turn. I mean, she's the representative of the heel turn here of
right.
um, the Trisolarans.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. And please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes, reading lists, pronunciation guides, and all the other content that we put up on the website along the podcast. Please leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter at rehydratepod. And please join us next time for season 5, episode 4, The Storyless Kingdom, covering the first half of part 3 of Death's End by Leo Sishin.